Alright, ladies and gentlemen, the 8th year anniversary for Marvel Future Fight is just around the corner. And when it comes to the anniversary, this is one of the times where I try to basically set myself up for the next 6 or 7 months of Marvel Future Fight, regardless of how the game changes. And seeing as though we had a dev note recently letting us know that they're going to be adding in new forms of PvP content, I actually wanted to see which artifacts I'm going to pick up this anniversary, because of the fact that artifacts are something that I don't gamble for on a regular basis, but they are actually quite impactful, especially impactful for PvP for certain characters. And if we're getting a new PvP game mode, I want to make the most of it. So today I decided to go through and I'm going to be putting together a tier list, if you will, of all 116 artifacts that we currently have in the game. Now keep in mind that this is just my personal opinion based on my experiences with these artifacts and how valuable I believe them to be. And the plan with this tier list is to, one, help me figure out which ones I want to focus on this year from the secret shop, because when the secret shop comes around every year, I usually go pretty hard either on Black Friday or the anniversary. I pick up a 5 and a 6-star artifact from these bingo rewards courtesy of the secret shop. And this year for sure I know I want to get at least a 5-star magic for that undead passive, but I don't know who else I want to get. However, let me just say this: even though some of these artifacts are very powerful, the characters themselves that the artifacts are for, in some cases those characters are currently not very powerful. But do keep in mind that Marvel Future Fight is a living, breathing entity, and we're always getting new power-ups, new tier 4s, new tier 3s, new uniforms. And what that means is, even if a character is currently very bad, if they have a good artifact and you get a 4, 5 or 6-star version, I would highly advise that you keep it, because at some point if that character gets a power-up, you may regret getting rid of that artifact. So that's why I'm going to basically break it down for you guys right here, let you know what each individual artifact does and where I would put them on the tier list. So if you want to use them as reroll fodder, or if you want to hang on to them, ultimately you have that information at your disposal. Now without further delay, let's jump into this, man. We're going to start off with Rhino. Rhino's artifact is actually very good. I would say borderline amazing, because what it does is every 25 seconds, if his HP drops below 40%, he actually heals himself for 70% of his max HP. And then on top of that, it also increases his max HP by 70%. So let's say he had 100,000 HP and then his HP drops below 40% and this artifact activates. Well, guess what? Now his HP jumps up to 170,000 for the max, and then he heals for 70% of that. A very powerful artifact. However, Rhino himself not currently a powerful character. However, a new uniform for him would definitely change things. I could definitely see at some point this guy becoming a powerhouse in PvP. So if you get a 6-star version of this artifact, definitely hold on to it. 4, 5 or 6, I definitely say hold on to it. Next up, we have another one of the new ones. We have Kraven the Hunter. This one is also amazing. I want to say borderline god tier. Kraven himself, not a god tier character. His damage is very low, but his artifact is very good. It's the exact same one as Gore the God Butcher. It basically gives him 20% extra damage to heroes and villains. So a very powerful artifact, but currently he's a underwhelming character. Next up, we have Lizard, and I would say this one is mediocre. It's 20% attack and 20% HP. It's cool, but it's not anything spectacular. Next up, we have Squirrel Girl, and this one I would put in the very good category. It has 15% extra damage to boss types, and it has 10% ignore dodge as well. Next up, we have Cassie Lang, and this is another one that's mediocre in my opinion. It gives you 26% all attack. Next up, we have Polaris, and this one right here increases the basic damage dealt to enemies with 50% HP or below by 20%. I don't really like these ones because of the fact that you have to get the enemy's HP low before you even see the effect from the artifact. Next up, we have Umbaku, and this one I think I want to put in amazing, and you're gonna have to hear me out on this one and let me know what you think in the comments, okay? So basically, Umbaku's artifact gives you 20% ignore dodge, and 15% all attack. However, unlike most artifacts, M'Baku's artifact will buff all allies, villains, heroes, it doesn't matter who. As long as M'Baku is on the team, this artifact is going to give them more attack and ignore dodge. And some characters having a little bit of ignore dodge goes a long way for them because they don't get any natively. So because of that, I think this is a really good artifact. Borderline amazing. Next up, we have Toxin, and Toxin I think I want to put in very good. It gives Toxin 25% ignore dodge and 20% all attack. I think it makes sense to put it in the mediocre category. Next up is Maya Lopez, or Echo, and her artifact is the exact same as Spider-Man and Black Widow. What it does is give her a 20% chance to dodge all incoming attacks, and it's a kind of dodge that you cannot get past. Next up, we have Kingo, and I think I'm gonna put Kingo's artifact in mediocre. Basically what it does is it increases basic damage dealt to enemies with 50% HP or below by 25%. Next up, we have Makari, and Makari's artifact is very similar to Kingo's. Next up, we have Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh's artifact is exactly the same as Rhino's. Next up, we have Thena, and Thena's artifact, in my opinion, is just on the cusp of being god tier. Definitely amazing. What it does, it gives you 25% ignore dodge and 20% extra damage dealt to super villains. Next up, we have Cersei, and this right here is definitely a god tier artifact. This artifact allowing her to revive. Next up, we have Icarus, and Icarus, I want to say this one is very good, and if anything, I would like to see a character get this and it operates the way how M'Baku's artifact actually activates. It gives Icarus 15% extra damage to supervillains for 9 seconds. It activates every 17 seconds when he's attacking, but in addition to the extra damage to supervillains, it also gives him ignore iframe. What they should have done was made it so that this artifact actually applied to all Eternals. Next up, we have Scream, and this one right here basically just gives you an 80% chance to increase your critical damage by 35%. Next up, we have Scarlet Spider, and it pains me to say, but this one is so bad, bro. Like, it could have been good, but it's so bad. So check this out. 50% chance to remove all debuffs when received, and he increases all Spider Sense characters' attack by 10%. Next up, we have Mr. Sinister, and this is one of those toxic artifacts. Sinister himself is an AC character. He probably will be meta in the new PvP content that's coming out, but definitely gotta put this one at the top of god tier with this man right here, Carnage, go Big Dog Logan, and also that girl Hela. These guys all have the undead artifact. Magic has it as well. But yeah, these 5 artifacts, if you ever get them, do not destroy them unless you have a higher level version. It makes these characters unkillable for 4 seconds if it's a 4-star, or 7 seconds if it's a 6-star. Next up, we have Professor X, and I say Professor X's artifact is, I want to say it's very good. It converts his mind resistance into mind damage. It also allows him to do 15% extra damage to alien characters. Next up, we have Sunbird, and I would say Sunbird is very good, even though Sunbird himself is not a very good character. He's just a passive for the Warriors of the Sky to revive. But what his artifact does is basically it applies to all Warriors of the Sky, gives them 20% damage reduction, and increases their max HP by 20%. So it's very good. Next up, we have Shadow Shell. I would say Shadow Shells is mediocre. It gives you 20% ignore dodge and 20% all attack. Now, it is a weaker version of Thena's, because from what I've seen, all attack and damage dealt are not 1-to-1. If you had 20% all attack and you were converting it into damage dealt, it would be more like 8% damage dealt, which is part of the reason why Shadow Shell's artifact is so much further down than Thena's, even though on paper they look very similar. Next up, we have War Tiger, and I would say his artifact is pretty amazing. It gives you 20% extra damage to villains and also gives you 20% damage reduction from villains. So it's a very good artifact. Blue Dragon's artifact is the same as Shadow Shell in my opinion. Next up, we have Swordmaster, and Swordmaster's artifact, I would say it's at the end ahead of mediocre. So you know how I was talking about Icarus and I said I wanted to see more characters get ignore iframe on their artifact? He did. It's a 20% chance when he's attacking and it's on a 16-second cooldown, where for Icarus it's just when he's attacking, there's no chance, it's just active when he's attacking every 17 seconds. This is why I rank Icarus's artifact much higher. Next up we have Arrow, and I gotta put Arrow in the bad category, man. So basically it's the exact same situation as Scarlet Spider, only it's worse. With Arrow it applies to just her and give herself 20% all attack.
Pathetic.
Next up we have Kitty Pryde, and Kitty Pryde's artifact is the exact same as War Tiger. Wave is 25% all attack. Next up we have Namor, and Namor's artifact gives you 25% extra damage to boss types. I'm gonna leave it here for now. Bishop's artifact is the exact same situation as Shadow Shell and Blue Dragon. Next up we have Iceman, and I think Iceman's is mediocre. Maybe there's an argument to be made that it can be a little bit higher. It takes 30% of his max cold resistance and turn it into cold damage, and then in addition to that it also gives him 20% resistance. Next up we have Psylocke, and Psylocke is the same thing as Scream. Next up we have Deadpool, and I want to put this in the bad so bad, even though you guys know I absolutely love Deadpool. 60% chance to remove all debuffs when received, and then increases all attack by 24%.
I beg your pardon?
Next up we have Nadia, and this one is good, could have been better. When Nadia's attacking, all allies recover 10% of their max HP for 1 second. Cooldown time is 10 seconds. I think this is very good for team-based game modes. If Nadia herself was a better character, this artifact would be way higher up, simply because of the fact that Nadia has to be alive and attacking for the artifact to activate. I think because of that I kind of have to put it in mediocre. If this was just activating every 10 seconds without Nadia needing to attack, I would put it in very good or amazing. Next up we have one of the best artifacts in the game, definitely deserves to be in God tier. I do not care what anybody says. Emma Frost's artifact, which allows you to reflect 35% of the damage you receive back in your enemy's face. Next up we have Angel, and Angel's artifact is the same as Spider-Man, Black Widow, and Maya Lopez, that 20% chance to dodge everything. Next up we have Colossus, and I gotta put this one in the mediocre category unfortunately, but it's a 50% chance at 6 stars. Every time Colossus is hit, he's gonna heal 10% of his max HP. So Shuri's artifact is the exact same situation as Bishop, just a little bit of ignore dodge, 25% that is, and 20% all attack. It's just they've copy pasted that one too much in my opinion. They gotta do something different. Next up we have Luna Snow, and this by far is, in my opinion, the worst artifact in the game.
What do you mean by that?
So it increases her cold damage by 50% of her cold resistance, but Luna Snow as of right now has 0 cold resistance in her kit. What is 50% of 0?
8,000? How? Wait, it's over 9. It's over 9,000!
These guys are absolutely out of their mind. Next up we have Adam Warlock, and I want to say this one right here is mediocre. Next up we have Nova. It gives him 20% damage reduction and allows him to do 15% more damage in PvP. Next up we have America Chavez. America Chavez's artifact is amazing in my opinion. It allows you to do 30% more damage in PvP. This one right here I'm finding really hard to justify, but I think it deserves to be in very good. Heimdall, when his HP drops below 60%, he takes 20% less damage from supervillains for 15 seconds, and then he also recovers 60% of his max HP. Next up we have Queen Valkyrie, and this one absolutely has to be in maybe God tier. It allows you to do 15% more damage in PvE. It applies to everyone, so I think it deserves to be right around here. Next up we have Scourge the Executioner. I really like how his artifact looks. It's the same thing as Cassie Lang, actually a little bit worse. Cassie Lang gives you 26% attack. This guy gives himself 25. Next up is Scarlet Witch. Scarlet Witch is the exact same thing as Gore. Next up we have Titania, and Titania's artifact is actually very good. It's the exact same effect as America Chavez. Next up we have Absorbing Man, and this guy recovers HP equals to 5% of the damage he reflected to the target. The cooldown on this thing is 1 second. I think this is a very good artifact in my opinion because the character has reflex deflect built into his kit. So I just realized that I put Vulture in very good when realistically he should be down here in mediocre. Sorry guys, I was not paying attention to this one. It gives you 15% instant critical rate and 20% all attack. The one I meant to put in very good is actually this one right here for Electro, because it gives you 60% all attack. Next up we have Mysterio, and I think Mysterio deserves to be in amazing, and because of that I have to move Thena's down. The more I think about it, the more it just makes sense. So for Mysterio, it gives him 20% ignore dodge and 20% extra damage to superheroes. Next up we have Sandman, and Sandman's gives him 20% damage reduction from superheroes and 15% extra HP. I think this one is very good. Next up we have Magneto, and Magneto 20% ignore dodge and 20% extra damage to boss types. It's around the same level as Namor's, so with Magneto being down here I kind of have no choice but to drag this guy down here too. Next up is Beast, and it's the exact same thing as Rhino and Gilgamesh. Next up we have Storm, and I think Storm deserves to go up here as well. 20% increase to all elemental damage, just makes sense. It should be in amazing. Jean Grey's artifact is the same as Gore and Scarlet Witch, where you do 20% more damage to heroes and villains, so it goes without saying that it should be in God tier. Next up we have Cyclops, 20% extra damage to boss types, so half of what Magneto gets. The thing about Cyclops is he's a support character, so this passive should have applied to everyone. Next up we have Agent Venom, and this one applies to all symbiote allies, very similar to my guy Scarlet Spider. However, no cooldown time on this one. It gives you a 30% damage reduction, boom, right there, instantly, very good. But in addition to that, it increases basic damage dealt to enemies with 25% HP or higher by 20%. Boom, absolutely has to be in amazing. So until the enemy's almost dead, you're hitting extra hard. That's amazing, bro. Next up we have Robbie Reyes. I want to put this one right here in very good. Applies to all fire allies. It gives them 30% fire damage based on their fire resistance, and keep in mind if you have Robbie Reyes on your team, his 4-star passive is going to give you 60% fire resistance. I think there's an argument to be made for this one being in amazing. Next up we have Moon Girl. If only this applied to other people, but basically it gives you 25% ignore dodge and 20% extra damage to supervillains. It's amazing, truthfully speaking, but the character is just not very good at this moment in time. Next up we have Ironheart, and she has the same thing as Kingo and Makari. Next up we have arguably one of the worst artifacts in the game, and that is Clea's. This one gives you 10% skill cooldown and 15% all attack. I hope they never replicate this one. Next up we have Venom. It gives you 20% all attack and 25% max HP. It's the exact same thing pretty much that Lizard gets. Next up we have Juggernaut, and Juggernaut's artifact is the same as Rhino, Beast, and Gilgamesh. Next up is Destroyer, and Destroyer's artifact is the exact same thing as Absorbing Man. Next up we have the Wasp, and the Wasp got the same artifact as Scarlet Witch, Jean Grey, and Gore. Next up we have Giant Man, and Giant Man's artifact is actually, I would say, very good. He takes 20% less damage from heroes and villains. Swapping over from Giant Man to Ant-Man, this guy takes 20% less damage from boss types and does 20% more damage to boss types. Moving on to Elektra, she has the exact same artifact as Psylocke and Scream, so she's gonna go right here in the mediocre category. Moving on to Sif, she actually does 20% more damage to supervillains and take 20% less damage from them. Next up we have Miles Morales, and he has the exact same artifact effect as Spider-Man, Black Widow, Maya Lopez, and Angel. Next up we have Kamala Khan, and it's the same thing as Sif. Next up we have Thanos, and I think I'm gonna put Thanos in very good. I know you guys probably think I would put it higher because I like Thanos, but no, because all it does, it gives you more instant critical rate, more instant critical damage, and 15% ignore dodge. Truthfully speaking, I think it might be like a mediocre instead of a very good. But since Thanos doesn't have any ignore dodge in his kit, unless you're running pairing him with a CTB of energy, a little bit of ignore dodge is very helpful for both PvE and PvP content. Next up, we have Morgan Le Fay, and it's more of the same, actually. Same thing as Moon Knight and them. Moving on to Green Goblin. Green Goblin's artifact is actually what they copied to make Cassie Lang's, 26% all attack. Moving on, we have Thor's artifact, and this one converts lightning resistance into lightning damage and gives Thor 15% extra damage to supervillains, and it's the exact same one they copied for Iron Hammer. Next up, we have Weapon X. Weapon X does 20% more damage to supervillains, plus she gets ignore dodge. It's very similar to the one that Athena got. Next up, we have Ghost Panther, and this one converts fire resistance into 30% more fire damage, and he also deals 15% more damage to supervillains, so I think it's a very good artifact. Next up, we have Captain America. Pretty much the exact same thing as Sif. Next up, we have Hulk, and in the case of Hulk, he's actually getting 25% HP. I would put him right here with Venom and Lizard, because in the case of Lizard and Venom, they both got 20% attack and 25% HP. Hulk is only getting 25% HP, so it seems on the surface to be worse, but actually in the case of Hulk, Hulk does damage based off of his HP, so giving him more HP is the same as giving him more attack and more survivability at the same time, but we could just put it in mediocre for argument's sake. Next up, we have Dr. Octavius, and this artifact allows him to do 25% extra damage to aliens and creatures, and it's actually the same thing for MODOK. I want to say these are borderline god tier artifact. Next up, we have Angela, and this one is just gonna go right down here with Scourge because it's 25% all attack. Next up, we have Black Bolt, and I'm gonna give Black Bolt just above mediocre because they gave him 20% all attack and 25% ignore dodge. Black Bolt doesn't have ignore dodge natively, so it definitely helps him. So next up, we have the Punisher. This one gives him a 50% chance to remove all debuffs, and then he ignores 20% of the enemy's damage reduction. I think it's a very good artifact. However, it has a cooldown of 25 seconds and a duration of 14 seconds. So there's an argument to be made here because of the cooldown to put it a little bit lower, maybe in the mediocre category. Next up, we have Ultron, and I'm going to put Ultron in mediocre because he has a 15% chance when he's attacking to ignore your iframe for 4 seconds and increase his all attack by 30%. It's a 9-second cooldown on this thing. I think it's mediocre. Next up, we have Kate Bishop, something very similar to Ultron and Swordmaster, but I have to put it a little bit higher because it's more in line with what Punisher has. So for Kate Bishop, there's a 15% chance when she's attacking that she's gonna ignore your iframe for 8 seconds, but in addition to that, she's also going to ignore 20% of your damage reduction, very similar to the Punisher, which is why I say it's a little bit better than mediocre because it gives you iframe ignore and the ability to ignore the enemy's damage reduction. It's on a 16-second cooldown, so it's up 50% of the time. Next up, we have Ancient One, and Ancient One's artifact is actually pretty good, especially in conjunction with the Mystic Unleashed uniform, because that one gives you a lot of reflect. So combining reflect with 30% damage reduction goes a long way. Next up, we have Sharon Rogers, and this is arguably one of the worst artifacts in the game. It gives you 16% instant critical rate and 20% instant critical damage. It is what they copied to make Thanos, and the only reason why Thanos is in the very good category is because in addition to the instant critical rate and critical damage that they gave to Sharon Rogers, for Thanos they gave him ignore dodge, and like I explained to you earlier, Thanos does not have ignore dodge in his kit, and there's a lot of elusive characters in PvP like Spider-Man, Black Widow, etc., and you need a little bit of ignore dodge in your kit to counter those characters. Next up, we have Caecilius, and his artifact I would say is very good, borderline amazing. He does 20% more damage to superheroes and take 20% less damage from them. Next up, we have Shang-Chi, and Shang-Chi's artifact I want to say is mediocre because it gives him ignore dodge, 25% to be specific, and 20% all attack, but that is virtually meaningless to the character because if you take a look right here, Shang-Chi's fourth skill gives him 100% ignore dodge. Next up, we have Gwenpool, and it's pretty much the exact same thing as Shang-Chi, 15% ignore dodge, 20% all attack. Then we have Hyperion with 20% ignore dodge and 30% damage reduction reduction. This is very good. It's a borderline amazing. 30% damage reduction is very, very good for PvP, especially when this thing is not on a cooldown and it does not have an activation rate. Next up, we have Gamora, and this one gives you 20% ignore dodge, and then it's the same thing as Moon Knight and others, where the extra damage of the enemy has more than 50% HP, but because it has the ignore dodge, I'm inclined to put it in a very good category. Next up, we have Drax, and I would say his is very good as well. He stacks his all attack all the way up to 70% for 12 seconds on a 3-second cooldown, so this is pretty good. Now this one might piss off some of you guys, but I'm gonna put Doctor Strange in mediocre simply because of the cooldown time and the activation rate of his artifact. So there's a 20% chance when the time freeze effect is used for him to ignore the enemy's iframe for 5 seconds, increases his all attack by 24% for 5 seconds, and he has a 50% chance to dodge all incoming attacks for 5 seconds. However, keep in mind that even though this is on a 10-second cooldown with a 5-second duration, you're not going to have this up for 50% of the fight because it's only a 20% chance when the time freeze effect specifically is used. So truthfully speaking, this is gonna be more like once every 30 seconds you'll get a buff for 5 seconds. That's mediocre to bad if you ask me. Next up, we have Wong with 25% all attack, and you know we just put all of these in mediocre because they're just mediocre. Next up, we have Baron Mordo coming in with another mediocre artifact. 20% chance when he's dodging to give himself 20% ignore dodge and ignore iframe for 5 seconds, 10-second cooldown. Mediocre. Next up, we have Black Cat, and Black Cat absolutely has to go in God tier. I think this might be the one that I go for. I completely forgot how OP that this one was. So applies to all allies. I have a 3-star version, so it would be a big upgrade to get this at a 6-star. Increases all basic damage dealt to superheroes and supervillains by 10%, and increases damage dealt to boss type by 20%. I think this might be it. I think I just found the one. It took me going through almost 109 to remember that this is the one that I was supposed to be going for. So it looks like for me, I'm going to be going 5-star Magic and 6-star Black Cat. You made it this far in the video, but let's finish it up. We're already here. Next up, we have Jane Foster, and it's the same thing as Moon Knight and them. Next up, we have Kingpin, and I think this one goes in very good for me. Increases all basic attacks by 15%, and it stacks up to 60% for 15 seconds with a 10-second cooldown. The activation rate is when he's attacking. Not a chance, just when he's attacking, he's guaranteed to activate and start ramping up. Okay, so next up we have Blade. I think Blade is very good simply because of the fact that whenever he uses the HP steal effect, he stacks his attack up to 70% for 15 seconds, and there's only a 3-second cooldown. Next up we have Crescent, and Crescent got the godly treatment. She has the exact same artifact effect as Gore, Jean Grey, and Scarlet Witch. Moving on, we have Iron Man, and Iron Man's artifact gives him 25% extra damage to boss types, same as Namor, so gotta be up here. Now I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I've never seen anything spectacular from Hawkeye's artifact, so I'm gonna have to put it in mediocre. But basically what it does is it increases basic damage by 0.2% off his critical rate regardless of guaranteed critical rate, up to 35% for 10 seconds with a 15-second duration. But I've never really seen it pop off. I have like I believe a 4 or a 5-star version of my Hawkeye. Next up we have Arachnite, and Arachnite is kind of a hybrid because his gives him a 15% chance to dodge, same as Black Widow, Maya Lopez, and Spider-Man, but it also gives him 10% more damage in PvP. So really good artifact if you ask me. Next up we have White Fox, and White Fox's artifact is actually not that bad. She has a 25% chance when she's attacking to recover 20% of her max HP with a 14-second cooldown. I would say it's mediocre. Maybe you could justify it being very good, but the character is not a DPS, so we don't really need a heal from you. Now, if this heal could apply to the team, that would be something to consider. Lastly, we got She-Hulk, and for She-Hulk, I'm gonna put her in mediocre as well, to be honest with you guys. It applies to all of the Hulks. Basically, she gives them 40% more attack for 10 seconds with a 3-second cooldown. You know what, maybe there's an argument to be made for very good for She-Hulk, but this is where I'm gonna leave it, guys. Leave me your thoughts in the comment section here. Truthfully speaking, I think this is pretty accurate, but I'd love to hear from you guys in the comment section if you made it to this part of the video.